Welcome everyone, this is Citizens Forum. We have Dr. Mary Redmayne in Wellington. For her it's September 21st, for me in Victoria it's September 20th, 2016. Dr. Redmayne is currently working as an independent researcher in New Zealand, holding a position as Adjunct Research Fellow at Victoria University of Wellington. Her main interests lie in the impact of radio frequency exposure on young people's health. She is a member of the Standards Australia Committee on Human Exposure to Electromagnetic Fields, scientific advisor with the Environmental Health Trust, and peer reviewer for several journals. She is currently working as an independent researcher in New Zealand, also an Adjunct Research Fellow and PhD supervisor in the Centre for Population Health Research on Electromagnetic Energy at Monash University, Melbourne, Australia. Do you have time for a personal life with all those functions?
It all sounds far too much and then quite a mouthful.
Yeah. We have Dr. Redmayne on here to talk about a paper she recently co-authored with Dr. Ole Johansson of Karolinska Institute in Sweden. The paper focused on the experience of a woman in the U.S. Each time a local internet provider installed in or near her building a home router with hotspot capabilities for the public, she experienced electrohypersensitivity symptoms. Now, Dr. Redmayne, we've heard quite often that a lot of people don't believe electromagnetic hypersensitivity exists. What evidence do you have that it is real and it is an exposure caused by radio frequency?
Thank you for asking me. There's quite a lot of evidence. First of all, historically, there's a lot of evidence. So way back, I think the first research to do with electricity was in the late 1800s, but in 1924, a French scientist called Gosset first asked, is there another non-thermal mechanism causing observed effects? Something had led that researcher to believe that was likely because of the reports they were already getting about effects that people felt. And at that stage, it had already been established or announced that there was only a thermal effect. But that was already being questioned by 1924. And then after that, there were many, many other reports ongoing through the century about effects from exposures to radio frequencies. And some of those, admittedly, do seem to have been from rather high exposures, and they will have been thermal effects. But the armed forces and NASA have also done a huge amount of research and have found many effects from low exposures and reported those, including changes in proteins. So these are things that you can't choose to, I'm not going to get a change in proteins from worrying. You don't get genetic changes from worrying. Other reasons are, another early example, 1928, someone called Helen Hosmer, who was doing research, was employed by General Electric, who asked her to investigate headaches and symptoms of other illnesses that their technical staff were getting, and these were people who were working on the shortwave radio tubes. So that was an employer actually asking for research because of these exposures the staff were getting and the symptoms they reported in doing that work. There have been so many reports of it that there have been more than, the first name that was applied to it was back in the 20s, last century, and between it was in 1932, and between the 60s and the end of the century, there have been at least 8 other names in various countries given to this because it's so common. So you've got people reporting symptoms. They're not all going to be imagined, as Ole Johansson said, that there's something like 3 to 5% of populations reporting being electrohypersensitive. You'd have millions and millions of people in say, America and England that have got some imagined disease. It doesn't sound very credible. It sounds quite incredible.
Well,
There's
especially,
another thing. You've got
especially when there's a certain commonality to the symptoms that everyone can't be imagining the same symptoms.
well, yes, and no. There is a range of symptoms. This is one of the things criticised because many of the symptoms that are reported are actually quite hard to check on. Things like headaches. How do you measure somebody else's headache? So that is, and dizziness. They're hard things to actually measure. But that brings me to another point, that actually there are now published papers giving several factors that are not that can be measured. So these are objective biomarker tests. So, for instance, two of the authors publishing this. One is called Belpom, based in France, who has a group, and he's been working on this for many years. And another is a paper, first author De Luca, and that's with a group of Russians and Italians. And these people have identified particular markers which you can't consciously affect these outcomes, okay? So there are the various blood abnormalities, pro-inflammatory markers, increase in histamine, the presence of something called the anti-myelin and heat shock proteins, even though these were originally called heat shock proteins because they appeared when there was a heat, but they've now discovered that these are stimulated by exposure to radio frequency, even though heat has not been applied, or so little heat that there has not been a change in temperature. A decrease in vitamin D. The 24-hour urine test shows changes in the melatonin excretion. So various tests that and I didn't say some genetic predispositions as well. These are things that are not going to be affected by worry. They just those a nice rational way of actually exploring whether somebody is testing, whether somebody is electrohypersensitivity as they claim. Now, not everybody in Belpom's research that claimed it actually was identified as having it, but a very high percentage was.
You know, it's nice to hear that there is actually scientific evidence to support the feelings that I have. I do get the headaches quite often. I do get the dizziness in high areas, and it's nice to know that there is science that backs up that I actually have it.
Yes, it doesn't seem to be very widely known yet, but yes, there are papers published on that already quite recently.
Now, when I first got heavy dose of radiation and did experience the effects, I was in front of a very powerful transmitter. Now, that equipment isn't used anymore, but similar you will find on rooftops where the mobile phone base stations, etc., are up there. What concerns do you have about rooftop workers such as roofers, painters, window washers that get exposed to these?
I think this is a real concern because this is actually a concern from the point of view of the standard as well, that is, in what you're actually allowed to be exposed to, because the rooftop transmitters are generally speaking quite high power, and if you go within a certain radius of them, you're at serious risk of thermal effects. So, for instance, maintenance workers will have them turned off because otherwise there's very serious damage, including internal burns, and some can be ongoing damage in terms of migraines or serious headaches for many years have been reported. I'm concerned about it because I think a lot of window cleaners, for instance, who go down the sides of buildings don't know about it. They haven't been told. They tend to not belong to unions because they're independent contractors and quite highly paid they think they don't need a union. So they may not have actually been told, but it's a serious work exposure that they should sorry about that. Serious work exposure that should be avoided. So I'm concerned about it, and I think that having if more than just, even with just occupational workers, as I've just demonstrated, there should be more than just a painted line and a notice around them. It needs an actual physical obstacle, such as a fence, to stop people going within that radius.
Yeah, that's. I've been trying to encourage our Workers' Compensation Board here to do something about it, and they seem a little reluctant to actually come out and make a strong statement other than express there could be a reason for problems, which isn't strong enough.
If you look at the installations on the ground, they seem happy to put a fence and a radiation warning notice there. They should do the same on roofs.
They really should.
Yeah. If there was no access by anybody other than those who'd been told and trained about the hazards, then fair enough. But it's clear that there is access for other people, such as the window washers.
Mm-hmm. What steps do you recommend for those that are electro hypersensitive, and for those who aren't, such as not all rooftop workers may be sensitive, but they should take precautions, shouldn't they?
Definitely. Distance is your friend. So rooftop workers are really an occupational exposure these days, and it needs proper training. So I'll treat those as a slightly separate entity than the general public, and electro-hypersensitives particularly within that. So first of all, for people who are electro-hypersensitive, I think it makes sense to first of all note what exposures you personally react to, and then learn to recognize the emission sources. So, for instance, the lady who wrote the paper about is only sensitive to a particular brand of router and the hotspot that it produces. Now, she has learnt, she can't always, isn't necessarily within range of it, so she can't always see it, but she can tell immediately when it's there, so she asks around because the symptoms come back. Mm-hmm. So then she asks, and every time has found one of those routers has just been installed nearby. But if it's, say, base stations, learn to know what base stations look like. There's quite a variety of them. So learn to recognize your emission source, point to avoid them where possible, or maximize your distance. If you can't avoid it altogether, say it's your mobile phone, you can avoid that by putting it much further away or turning it off. But if you can't, if it's an installment outside, you can at least maximize your distance. The second part of that applies to everybody. Maximize your distance from these devices. So I use a laptop on my desk, but I have a separate wired mouse and keyboard, so as not to have the laptop right in front of me with my hands right on top of the central processing unit, for instance. Keep the phone somewhere other than in a pocket. Maximize your distance. And then for both groups, particularly hypersensitivities, find something positive. Find positive things to focus on and keep busy, just so as to minimize worry, because although some people put down these symptoms entirely to worry, it's clearly, to me and from what I've told you, it's clear that they cannot all be attributed to worry, but I equally suspect that in some cases that can make it worse. So try not to worry. It's easier said than done, but once you've done what you can, there's a very nice prayer. It goes like this: God, grant me the courage to change the things which I can and which should be changed, the serenity to accept the things I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that sort of sums it up in a way.
I was just going to say, I think that's good advice, and it's probably a good wrap for things then.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much for asking me today.
Well, thanks very much, and I should have you back on sometime. I think we could talk about a few more things.
Thanks very
Okay,
much.
thanks very much.
Okay.
Okay.
Goodbye.